The press conference had been scheduled for weeks, yet as the day arrived, there was an undeniable electricity in the air. The room was packed, overflowing with journalists, photographers, and television crews, all waiting for the moment the doors would open and Donald Trump would take the stage. The hum of whispered conversations filled the space, punctuated by the occasional sound of camera shutters clicking as reporters adjusted their lenses, checking their angles for the perfect shot. Some were there for the spectacle. Others were there to press him hard, to push their agendas, to challenge him with relentless questioning. And then there were those who had come prepared to provoke, to goad him into one of those explosive exchanges that had become legendary in political journalism. Among them sat Lisa Cartwright, a senior political correspondent for one of the nation's largest left-leaning networks. She had built her career on sharp, cutting questions, on exposing what she called political deception, and on making sure those in power were held accountable. But what she really wanted, what she needed, was a moment, a viral clip. Something that would set social media on fire, something that would be replayed endlessly on the nightly news, and Donald Trump was the perfect target. She adjusted her microphone, flipping through her notes one last time. She had planned her line of questioning meticulously, rehearsed her approach, even predicted the responses she might get. She knew how Trump operated, his bravado, his tendency to go on the offensive, his ability to turn the tables on a questioner in an instant. But today, she was determined to corner him. Today, she would make him stumble. The doors finally swung open, and the chatter in the room died down instantly. Secret Service agents stepped in first, scanning the room with their usual stoic expressions. Their presence a quiet reminder that no matter what unfolded, Trump was always under watchful protection. Then he walked in. Donald Trump strode to the podium with his signature confidence, adjusting his red tie with a quick tug before placing both hands on the lectern. The flashes of cameras intensified, and the room, despite being filled with some of the most seasoned journalists in the country, seemed to tense up. "All right, folks," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly over the gathered crowd. "I know you've all been waiting. We've got a lot to cover today. Big things, great things, things that, quite frankly, people said could never happen. But they're happening, believe me." A few chuckles rippled through the room. His supporters loved this, his critics hated it. Either way, he had already seized control of the room. The first few questions were routine: policy updates, economic numbers, foreign relations. Trump answered with his usual blend of statistics, off-the-cuff remarks, and bold declarations about the success of his administration. He knew how to command a press conference, how to keep the energy flowing, how to keep both supporters and detractors hanging on his every word. Then came Lisa's moment. Her hand shot up, and the moderator, perhaps knowingly, nodded in her direction. She cleared her throat and stood up, microphone in hand. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice even but edged with the practiced sharpness of someone who had done this many times before. "Your administration continues to claim economic success, but multiple independent reports suggest that job growth is stagnating, wages are not rising as fast as inflation, and minority communities are being disproportionately affected. Yet you continue to push a narrative that everything is tremendous. Do you deny these economic hardships, or are you simply choosing to ignore them?" A murmur rippled through the room. This was it. The kind of direct, confrontational question designed to trip him up, to force him into an uncomfortable position. Trump didn't hesitate. "Excuse me," he said, holding up a finger. "Excuse me. First of all, that's a terrible question, okay? Just a really terrible, dishonest question. And let me tell you why." He turned slightly, shifting his weight as he looked directly at Lisa. "The economy is doing better than it has in decades. Decades. You want to talk about independent reports? I can show you plenty of independent reports that say exactly the opposite of what you're claiming, but you won't mention those, will you? No, because your network, you know, the one that's been pushing fake news for years, your network doesn't like to talk about the good stuff. You only focus on the negative, and even when there's nothing negative, you make it up. Lisa opened her mouth to interject, but Trump wasn't finished. You're saying wages aren't rising? Wrong. Wages are up. More jobs? We have more people working now than ever before. Minority communities? They're thriving. Record low unemployment, record high opportunity, and that's a fact. Not an opinion. A fact. But see, you don't care about facts. You only care about pushing a narrative, a very dishonest narrative. The room was silent except for the rapid-fire clicking of cameras capturing the moment. Lisa narrowed her eyes slightly, gripping her microphone tighter. She wasn't going to back down. With all due respect, Mr. Trump, she said, her voice steady but pointed. The numbers don't lie. Government data from... Trump waved a hand. Oh, give me a break, Lisa, come on. He shook his head, exhaling loudly as he turned back toward the rest of the press. You see this, folks? This is what we're dealing with. They take a couple of numbers, twist them around, and try to make it seem like everything is a disaster. It's the same old trick, over and over. Lisa opened her mouth again, but Trump leaned in slightly, his voice dropping just enough to make sure everyone could still hear. You know what the problem is? He said, eyes locked onto her. You're desperate to make me look bad. You come in here with your little notes, your pre-written questions, already convinced that no matter what I say, you'll spin it. But it's not working anymore. People see through it. Lisa's jaw tightened. The entire room was watching, some nodding in agreement, others barely concealing their frustration. Trump turned back toward the cameras. The American people aren't stupid, he said. They know when they're being lied to. They see the economy, they see the success, they see the jobs coming back. And no matter how much you try to twist it, no matter how much your network tries to push its ridiculous agenda, the facts are the facts. And that's why your ratings are in the toilet. A few reporters gasped quietly. A smattering of chuckles and murmurs spread across the room. Lisa's face remained impassive, but inside she felt the sting. Trump had flipped it. Again. He had taken her moment, her planned attack, and turned it into a counteroffensive so strong that she was now the one looking defensive. Trump straightened his tie. Next question, he said smoothly, moving on as if the exchange had never happened, but everyone in the room knew that was the moment that would be replayed over and over, and Lisa Cartwright, for all her preparation, had just become the latest reporter to underestimate Donald Trump. Lisa Cartwright felt the heat creeping up her neck. She was a seasoned journalist, used to tense exchanges, but something about Trump's ability to turn the tables so effortlessly unsettled her. He hadn't just dismissed her question, he had flipped it, put her on the defensive, and made her the story instead of answering the one she had tried to push. But she wasn't done. As Trump shifted his attention to another reporter, she leaned slightly forward, refusing to let him control the moment. Mr. Trump, she interrupted, her voice more forceful now, with all due respect, you didn't actually address the facts I brought up. You're dismissing government reports, data compiled by experts, as fake news, simply because it doesn't fit your narrative. Trump sighed theatrically, shaking his head. Lisa, 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 he said, as if he were speaking to a child. I did address it. You just don't like my answer. That's your problem. See, this is what your network does. You push an idea, I give you the truth, and then you act like I never said anything. He turned to the crowd of reporters, gesturing broadly. It's incredible, it really is. They keep saying, but the data. And they only pull the numbers that make things look bad. Do you know what I call that? A lie by omission. And it's all they do. Lisa clenched her jaw, gripping the microphone tighter. So, you're saying that every economist, every financial analyst who disagrees with you is lying? Trump smirked. No, I'm saying your economists and your analysts are cherry-picking. Big difference. I've got economists too. Ever hear of Larry Kudlow, Art Laffer? These are some of the smartest people you'll ever meet. And guess what? They say we're doing fantastic, but you don't want to hear from them, do you? because that doesn't fit the crisis you're trying to sell. The tension in the room was thick. A few journalists exchanged glances, some smirking at Lisa's predicament while others jotted down notes furiously. The cameras had never stopped rolling. Every word of this exchange was going to be dissected, played over and over on news channels and social media. Lisa inhaled sharply. She needed to regain control. "Mr. Trump, you often claim that the media is fake news, yet you regularly cite sources that align with your views. Are you not guilty of the same thing you accuse others of?" Trump chuckled, shaking his head. "Nice try, Lisa. But let me tell you the difference. I talk to everybody. I listen to all the numbers. And then I make my own decision based on reality, not an agenda. The problem with people like you is that you don't care about reality. You want a bad headline, so you make it up. If the economy is strong, you find a way to say it's weak. If jobs are up, you find a way to say it's not enough. You can't stand that things are going well under my leadership." Lisa opened her mouth, but Trump was already rolling. "You know what's funny?" he continued, turning slightly toward the rest of the room. "When I took office, all these experts, all these people who love to say, 'Trust the data,' they were saying we'd have a recession, a disaster. They said my policies would ruin the economy. And now, we've got growth, we've got jobs, and guess what? They still say it's bad. It's unbelievable." A few conservative reporters in the room nodded, murmuring in agreement. Others sat stone-faced, waiting for their turn to pounce. Lisa wasn't ready to give up yet. She knew she had one more shot to make her point. "Then let's talk about credibility," she pressed. "If your numbers are right, if everything is as good as you say, why are so many economists predicting instability? And why do so many independent fact-checkers dispute your claims?" Trump's smile widened. He had been waiting for this. "Oh, fact-checkers?" he said, almost laughing. "You're talking about those little websites that work for the same media companies that attack me every day? The ones that fact-check jokes and then call them false? Please." He waved a dismissive hand. "They're not fact-checkers, they're opinion checkers. And their opinion is that I should lose." Lisa blinked, momentarily thrown off. "And as for economists predicting instability," Trump continued, not giving her a chance to recover, "they always predict instability. It's their job. If things are good, they say a crash is coming. If things are bad, they say it's going to get worse. That way, no matter what happens, they can say they were right. That's the game." He leaned slightly forward. "But here's the truth. I've done more for this economy than any president in modern history. You don't have to take my word for it. Ask the small business owners. Ask the workers who got bonuses because of my tax cuts. Ask the real people, not the experts sitting in their offices in Washington." Lisa felt her heartbeat quicken. She was losing ground, and she knew it. Every attempt she had made to corner him had been met with an even stronger counterpunch. Trump was a master at this, and she was running out of moves, but she had to try one more time. "Then let's talk about the deficit," she said quickly, shifting gears. "Your administration's policies have added trillions to the national debt. Isn't that a contradiction to your claims of economic success?" Trump's smile didn't waver. "Lisa, do you know what the biggest drivers of the debt are? Entitlements. Spending that's been out of control for decades. And by the way, a lot of that spending, it comes from programs your network defends at all costs. The same people who scream about the debt refuse to cut a single dollar from wasteful government programs." Lisa was about to respond, but Trump held up a hand. "And let's not forget, you loved the debt when Obama was president. Didn't say a word about it back then. But now it's suddenly the biggest issue in the world." He shook his head. "Give me a break." Another murmur spread through the room. Even some of Lisa's colleagues looked uneasy. She had pushed hard, but Trump had met her at every turn. He straightened his tie again, giving her one last look. "You know, Lisa, I'll give you credit. You try hard. You really do. But at the end of the day, people see through it. They see the bias, they see the spin, and they're done with it. Then, turning back to the rest of the press corps, he flashed a grin. All right, next question. Lisa sat back down, gripping her notes tightly. She had just learned what so many before her had. Going head-to-head with Trump was never easy. And today, once again, he had made sure everyone knew who was in control. Lisa Cartwright's fingers curled around her pen, her knuckles turning white as she listened to Trump shift effortlessly to the next question, as if their heated exchange had never even happened. She could feel the weight of the cameras still lingering on her, capturing every micro-expression, every flicker of frustration, every attempt to mask the fact that she had lost control of the moment. Meanwhile, Trump seemed energized. He thrived in these battles, not just because of the cameras or the audience, but because he enjoyed taking on the press. To him, this was sport, and he had just scored a decisive victory. A reporter from a conservative outlet was the next to be called on, and predictably, the tone of the room shifted. The question was softer, more favorable. Something about how he had managed to navigate the country's economic growth despite relentless media attacks. Trump smiled. Well, it's because we focus on results, he said smoothly, clasping his hands together over the podium. You know, I wake up every day and I think, how can we make this country stronger? And let me tell you something. We are winning in ways people didn't even think were possible. Jobs, trade deals, deregulation, border security, you name it. And the only people who don't want to admit it? The media, the liberal media. He turned back toward Lisa slightly, not calling her out by name but making it clear exactly who he was referring to. They don't report the wins. They don't want to. They sit in these rooms in their fancy studios and they push negativity every single day. Because if people knew the truth, if they saw the success happening right in front of their eyes, these networks would be finished. They need the outrage. They need the lies. Lisa felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't just about her anymore. He was launching a full-scale assault on the press, on the very institution she had built her career around. Another journalist, a middle-aged man from the Washington Post, raised his hand, trying to steer the conversation back toward policy. Mr. Trump, you've repeatedly suggested that the media is working against you, but isn't it the job of journalists to challenge those in power? Shouldn't a free press hold leaders accountable? Trump leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the podium. His expression was firm, but his voice was calm, almost calculated. A real free press holds everyone accountable, not just the people they don't like. You know, I don't mind tough questions. I actually like them. But what I don't like, what the American people don't like, is a media that isn't interested in the truth. They're interested in narratives. They're interested in taking things out of context, in pushing stories that fit their agenda, while ignoring the facts that don't. He gestured toward the cameras. You know how many times they've been caught? How many stories have turned out to be completely false? And do they apologize? No. They just move on to the next thing, the next hit piece. Because it was never about the truth, it was about getting me. That's what this has always been. Lisa took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. She wasn't about to let him paint the entire press as dishonest. She raised her hand again. Trump smirked. Oh, here we go, he muttered, pointing toward her. Lisa's back. Go ahead, Lisa. Let's see what you've got now. She stood up. She had to be careful. If she got rattled, if she let him bait her into another emotional exchange, he'd win again. So she kept her voice steady, professional. Mr. Trump, you say the media ignores positive stories, but what about your own rhetoric? You attack the press constantly. You call journalists the enemy of the people. Doesn't that undermine faith in democracy? Doesn't that create division? Trump chuckled, shaking his head. Lisa, I don't create division. I expose it. Big difference. Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but he kept going. And let me tell you something. If the media did their job fairly, I wouldn't have to say a word, but they don't. They pick sides, they pick stories, they twist words, and when I call them out, that's what they don't like. They can dish it out, but they can't take it. His voice grew sharper, the room hanging on his every word. You want to talk about democracy? You know what's bad for democracy? A press that colludes with one party, a press that buries stories that don't help their side and amplifies the ones that do. A press that spends 4 years pushing a fake Russia hoax, and when it turns out to be nonsense, they just pretend it never happened. Lisa's face remained neutral, but inside, she felt herself growing tense. He was hammering. Hard now, faster, more relentless. Trump turned back to the rest of the reporters, his voice rising slightly. And let's not forget, the media didn't have a problem with division when they were attacking me. When they spent years calling me illegitimate, when they pushed conspiracy theories, when they treated my supporters like dirt. No. Back then, division was fine. Back then, it was necessary. But now that I fight back, now it's a problem? He shook his head. Give me a break. The room was silent. Even some of the reporters who had come prepared to challenge him seemed taken aback by the intensity of his response. Lisa knew she couldn't push any further without looking desperate. She had lost this round. There was nothing more she could say without it backfiring. She sat back down, setting her pen on her notebook. She had come here determined to expose Trump, but instead, he had turned the entire event into a referendum on the media. Trump smoothed his tie and straightened his posture. "All right, folks," he said, his voice returning to a more casual tone. "I think we've had enough fun for one day. I know the media is going to run with this, twist it, spin it, but guess what? The American people see through it, and that's why we keep winning." With that, he gave a quick nod to his press secretary, signaling that the conference was over. His team swiftly moved in, guiding him toward the exit. As he walked out, he paused, just for a moment, turned back to Lisa, and flashed that trademark smirk. Better luck next time. Then he was gone. The room remained still for several seconds. Lisa felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had challenged him, pushed him, tried to trip him up. But instead, she had been the one left struggling to recover. The cameras were still rolling. The footage would be played across every network, dissected by political analysts, debated endlessly online. Some would call Trump's performance masterful, others would call it dangerous. But one thing was certain. He had owned that room. As the journalists began to gather their notes, whispering among themselves, Lisa let out a slow breath. She had come looking for a viral moment, and she had found one, just not the one she had planned.